without further ado, thank you all for coming out. This is day one of our two-day Shapiro Symposium, which is a long-standing tradition here at GW Law. My name is Randall Abaid. I'm the Assistant Dean for Environmental Law Studies here at GW Law, and it's just been such a great pleasure to be part of this tradition of the annual Shapiro Symposium. And this year's event is particularly near and dear to my heart. I'm someone who has spent a lot of time with environmental justice and climate justice issues, so we're starting to build our curriculum out in that direction as well to reflect training a new generation of environmental lawyers here at GW. And so I thought the opportunity to have a Shapiro Symposium built entirely around that theme of environmental justice and climate justice would be really exciting. And then putting together the event with the help of a wonderful Shapiro Symposium planning committee and getting to see how these panels were coming together, it was like, wow, I'm really excited and proud to be a part of this and can't wait to see it unfold over the next day and a half. So today is a gentle introduction to the excitement that will continue to build over all day tomorrow. So we are in this room only for today, and then we will, the speakers who have assembled here with travel itineraries from a variety of destinations are a little weary from that trip in today, so we're going to have a nice speakers dinner after the keynote, and then we're going to make sure our speakers are recharged and ready to go for a full day tomorrow that starts at 8 o'clock. We're going to be at the Burns Moot Courtroom at the opposite end of this hallway here on the first floor. We're going to be in the Burns Moot Courtroom all day tomorrow. Continental breakfast at 8, and then we'll go straight through with 4 outstanding panels that you'll hear more about, and a box lunch, and the Grodsky competition winner announcement. So that's an annual writing contest that you'll hear more about here at GW Law, awarded to the student that writes the best environmental law paper each year. So that's a part of tomorrow as well. So just in terms of some housekeeping logistics, we are tomorrow in person and online, but if you have contacts that are DC based, please encourage them to come in person. We really want to feel that in-person energy tomorrow with the panels we've assembled, and to the extent they're interested but just somehow can't be here, online attendance is available as well. So it's really exciting to see the range of perspectives that we have in this event that we've put together. So typically the Shapiro Symposium is really all about law, as it should be. We're a law school after all, we're the environmental and energy law program. But this year in particular, because environmental justice and climate justice are by nature so interdisciplinary, this is a really exciting range of interdisciplinary expertise that we've assembled, and at least in my experience, perhaps the largest age range of experts that I've ever assembled in one event. So we have some fantastic youth expertise on these issues, and some very senior academic and other scholars and experts in the field as well. So just a really exciting opportunity for dialogue. And today in particular, to have a little bit more of an informal opportunity to network. That's often the best part of these events, and so hopefully you'll take full advantage of that networking opportunity over the next day and a half. So we have an outstanding keynote speaker for you today that we're very proud to be able to offer you. And it was a book that got my attention very early on. I started to see the references to the octopus in the parking garage, and I thought, I remember when that news story broke. I was in Florida at the time, and something crossed my email or social media, and there's a parking garage and an octopus somehow found its way in, and that was just such an iconic image for the threat that we're facing from climate change and sea level rise and adapting to this new normal. And so then I learned that Professor Verchick had put a book together around that idea, and in a way that was not necessarily a traditional law treatise, one that you want to read and engage with and not fall asleep on like I do with everything that's strictly law when I'm trying to get some inspiration late at night. So So just really excited to have that kind of a book to offer you and discuss today, and also really delighted to have my fantastic colleague, Professor Rob Glicksman, who has been nothing short of a legend in the field of environmental law at GW. So fortunate to have him here after he already had a storied career as an environmental law scholar and teacher at the University of Kansas for a very long time. He's been with us for about 15 years now, and we hope that's just the beginning of another 50 years for him, because he's essential to our program. His expertise, his patience, his wisdom. It's just a remarkable opportunity for someone like me, who's in my second year as the dean of this program, to be able to turn to someone like Professor Glicksman for all kinds of sources of input. So he's going to do the honor of giving the full and proper introduction to our distinguished keynote lecturer, Professor Verchick. So, Professor Glicksman, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Randy. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to welcome you this afternoon. Hopefully, we'll see you all day tomorrow as well. I have to give kudos in turn to Dina Bay, who really has been the reason for this convocation of experts on climate change and adaptation, and who's gathered a stellar list of people to present to us this afternoon and tomorrow. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our keynote speaker for the 2024 Shapiro Symposium. We used to attend panels where the introducer or the moderator said, well, you can all look at the program to find out what the speakers' bios are, so we won't take our time to do that. Well, I'm going to take the time to do that this afternoon. I have the liberty of a few minutes to do exactly that. So, Robert Verchick is the Gaudier St. Martin Eminent Scholar and Chair of Environmental Law at the Loyola University New Orleans College of Law, where he's also the faculty director of the Center for Environmental Law. This year, Rob is serving as the Francis V. Cashin Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. He's also a senior fellow in disaster resilience at Tulane University, and the president of the Center for Progressive Reform, a nonprofit research and advocacy group that conducts independent scholarly research, policy analysis, and advocates for effective, collective solutions to our most pressing societal challenges. As a member scholar and member of the board of directors at CPR, I've worked closely with Rob for years and can attest to both his incredible leadership skills and his firm commitment to achieving more effective and equitable environmental governance. To give you a bit of Rob's background, he's a graduate of Stanford University. He earned his bachelor's degree at the Harvard Law School. He's since become an expert in climate change law, disaster law, and environmental regulation, spending his career studying environmental resilience across the country. 2009-2010, Rob served in the Obama administration as Deputy Associate Administrator for Policy at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. In that role, he helped develop climate adaptation policy for EPA and served on President Obama's Climate Change Adaptation Task Force, an interagency team. In the fall of 2012, Rob researched climate adaptation policies in India as a visiting scholar at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi, supported by a Fulbright award. He's taught as a visitor at several schools, including Beijing University in China and Aarhus University in Denmark, and has received several teaching awards over the course of his career. He's lectured across the US, Europe, and Asia. Rob also comments frequently on radio shows like NPR's All Things Considered. He has written commentary for the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Slate, and other publications. His podcast, called Connect the Dots, which he developed for CPR, which I highly recommend to you, focuses on tackling some of our biggest environmental and public health challenges. Rob's a prolific scholar, having written more than 60 articles and 5 books. These books include the award-winning Facing Catastrophe, Environmental Action for a Post-Katrina World, published by Harvard University Press in 2010. His latest book, which forms the basis of his keynote address today, as Randy said, is The Octopus in the Parking Garage, Call for Climate Resilience, published by Columbia University Press last year. Let me quote to you a couple of the blurbs on the book jacket, in case you haven't seen them yet. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island says that Rob Verchick has created a smart roadmap for planning for the future on a changing planet. That's a pretty big agenda, but Rob addresses it masterfully in the book. John Barry, who has written books about global pandemics, writes that ranging from comparative anatomy to anthropology, history, philosophy, engineering, politics, this is a fascinating, provocative, and important book. Tom Lineberger, a former member of the Business Roundtable, urges every leader to read this book and use whatever platform available to help drive the changes needed to save the planet. I'll just add, and this echoes again something Randy said, it's hard for me to believe that a law professor actually wrote this book. It reads more like a thrilling mystery novel than a fusty academic tome. It's a real page-turner. Rob's unique and accessible style and voice jumping off virtually every page of the book. The book jacket says that The Octopus in the Garden examines how we can manage the risks that we can no longer avoid, laying out our options as we face climate breakdown. It does indeed do that, but it does so much more, challenging the reader to think deeply about not only the ongoing climate crisis, but also the role that each of us can play, individually and collectively, in resolving it. So with that, please join me in welcoming this year's keynote speaker at the Shapiro Symposium, Professor Rob Verchick.
Wow, thank you so much, everybody. That was a lovely introduction. I was seeing if I can get the slides. I might need some help. Oh, that works. That works. Okay. All right. Oh, now you get the QR code. Well, thanks everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks so much for coming to this program. And it's going to be a super event. One of the things I'm going to try to do today is set the table a little bit for some of the issues and the topics that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. It has been cold and rainy outside, and I apologize for that, but what I want to do is see if you can use your imagination for a moment and think that you're not in a place that's cold and rainy. I want you to imagine that you're here, okay? You are in Miami Beach, November, it's still warm, all right? And I want you to imagine that you are a realtor, and your name is Richard Conlon, and you live in a condominium complex just like this on Biscayne Bay, which is beautiful. Okay, I was there last spring, all right? And imagine that you are getting in your car, which means you have to go into the garage of that condominium unit, and there is a garage there that I've been poking around, and you go in there in the morning, and you're just going to put your foot right down on the concrete to go get your car, and something's wrong already because your foot is in water up to above your ankle. And you start looking around, and it's still kind of greenish light there because of the fluorescent lighting on the concrete roof. And you're poking around, kind of looking around, and you hear the slish, slosh, slish, slosh. And you see this. You see a giant octopus. It's alive like a double-sized pizza, flip-flopping around there. And if you're like me, or like Richard Conlon, you would do what anybody would do. You take out your phone and you start taking pictures of it. And you put it on Facebook and everywhere else. And all of a sudden, people all over social media are talking about the octopus in the parking garage. Now, the second thing you do is you talk to maybe one of the security people who brings in a bucket and gets the little critter back into the water, which happens, so I know you're worried about that. I heard about this story just like Randy Abbott did, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? It's a climate change story, all right? Here's how it happened. All of these buildings on Biscayne Bay have big pipes for drainage. And those pipes go all the way down to the bay, and they used to all perch at the very bottom, but just above the water line. Now, things are subsiding, the land is, sea level is rising. Sometimes you get curious tides, supermoons, all these kinds of things. It pushes the water the wrong way, and up burps a cephalopod. Okay, so it's a climate change story. And the first thing that I did, okay, because I'm not a realtor, is the only thing I know how to do is write op-eds. So I called a friend, Dan Farber, who's a friend, mutual friend of all of ours, and we decided we're going to write an op-ed together in the Miami Herald called Octopus in the Parking Garage, and we say that the octopus is an 8-armed alarm bell for climate change, because if we don't know how to keep sea life out of garages, what else don't we know how to do, right? That's how we started this. And like any sort of person with a temperament like mine, dog with a bone, I'm like, okay, I wrote an op-ed, I have to write a book, all right? And so that's kind of where all of this went. Now, we're gonna look at summer coming up and think about the summer we just had. We had wildfires all over the place. We had wildfires in the Louisiana swamps last summer. We had one of the largest modern wildfires, most destructive, in Hawaii, as you know. We had heat waves across the country. We had floods from Cathedral City all the way to Charleston, South Carolina. And out in Biscayne Bay, we had, and you might not even know we had this, ocean heat waves. It was jacuzzi temperatures in Biscayne Bay last summer, and I mean over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's a hot jacuzzi. And one of the things that I find really interesting here is that more than half of Americans experience these things. This is a moment when people are learning about climate change in a very personal, visceral way. And I think that learning how to adapt to climate change is one of the ways to reach people who might not otherwise be as concerned as getting their EV and so on. We are in what the scientists call a no analog future, right? Because this is what we're seeing, all right, that hockey stick going up. And this is what we're prepared for, which is the same old, right? What we've had for the last several 100,000 years. And so the climate's changing super fast, and we have to figure out a way to do something about it, because otherwise we're going to lose $1 trillion of assets just from sea level rise. We're going to lose billions, hundreds of billions of hours of lost labor over time. Here, just 2 billion per year, right? We're going to lose a lot of the things we depend on our natural resources for, including a frozen reservoir system that just delivers water when we need it in spring, and it filters our water and so on. And in fact, the scientists and the economists tell us that if we don't do anything about adapting to climate change and becoming more resilient, we're going to lose $500 billion every single year. Okay, just so you know how much that is, that's about the amount that our economy has expanded on average every year over let's say the last 5-10 years. That's the climate tax, right? That we're trying to avoid. Now, we know enough about how to fix things. We have a lot of technology, we can use more, but my theme is that this is a collective action problem and a law problem, because I'm a lawyer. The first thing we need to do, job one, right, is reducing carbon pollution. The second job one is we have to get resilient. When I worked at the EPA in the Obama administration, that's the first time actually an administration really said we're going to try to adapt to climate change at a federal level. All right, and we're doing it again in the Biden administration. How can you manage, how can you keep up, learn, adapt, and thrive? And at the same time, and this is from my work at EPA, what we figured out is when you're adapting, you have to be flexible, you have to be forward-looking, and really you have to be fair. And your laws have to be prepared for that kind of thing. Now, when I was at the EPA in the Obama administration, a lot of people at EPA didn't understand why we were concerned about climate resilience, and I'm not kidding you. Right? They weren't even sure what the EPA's job was. They're like, oh, well, maybe we have a lab that might get flooded. Okay, I'll grant you that. And I would say, I'm just telling you, right? And I'm saying, well, what about the ozone season getting longer? What about, pollutants in the water when there's less water flowing through the stream? What about that, right? And all of a sudden, we started to look at these sorts of things, and we started to develop ideas about it. Now, when I first started thinking about climate resilience was after my house flooded after Hurricane Katrina, right? And I said, my whole career is going to be about this. But even then, and even in Louisiana, there were people that pushed back because they thought that talking about climate resilience was throwing in the towel. And actually, bless his heart, Al Gore said that climate resilience was lazy back when. Now, he won the Nobel Prize, he deserves it, total like it, okay? And he's recanted, but he was wrong then, right? Because part of the problem is that our heat of the atmosphere and of that ocean, which is holding most of the heat, it's not going to cool down in a generation even if we turn the lights out today, right? Probably no one living is going to experience most of the good things that happen about climate change if we get carbon out of the atmosphere. It's going to take that long, and so something else has to happen. Now, there are lots of ways that you can adapt to climate change. That's me in the background in New Orleans. We have a $14 billion levee system protecting us. So those are the largest pump systems in the world that you're looking at right there. We also do a lot of adjusting. Right? We raised our roads. When I evacuate from a hurricane, I take that road that's higher than it was during Hurricane Katrina because of sea level rise. And there are groups and communities that are thinking about retreating. And that's a picture from Louisiana too, actually, that I took from an airplane. I'm not going to talk about those things specifically because I want to talk specifically about people. This book that I wrote is for people. It's a popular book. There's law in it, but it's mainly stories and people and trying to tell a larger narrative. I'm happy to say this book was a required read at LSU, Louisiana State University last year among their freshmen, and I gave a lot of talks among freshmen, and one of the kids in the back says, I'm just a powerless young, that's what he said, I'm a powerless young person, what can I do? And I said, I just spent 2 or 3 years writing this book for people like you, because I wrote it for younger people. And I said, I didn't waste all of that time writing it for people who don't have power. If you don't have power, then I did the wrong thing, because I think you got a lot of power. And so what I ended up doing, though, is talking to a lot of people, not just about how climate affects them, but about how they are hoping to fix the world. And I'm going to introduce you to some of those people, all right? Now, I have a theory of change, okay? And at Harvard, I'm a fellow at Harvard, I've been talking about another book I'm working on. And one of the things we talk about are our theories of change. And I got called out a little bit because they said I wasn't thinking in a structural way about changing all of the structure of the world, all right? So here it is. Here's structural change, all right? That's the Inflation Reduction Act being signed by Biden. That's pumping $400 billion plus into our economy to get renewables and to get climate resilience. It's changing our economy. It's structural. Let me show you where I draw the line from that. Where does this come from? This is where it comes from. Think about the protests over the Dakota Access Pipeline. All right. You know who was visiting that protest? A young Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know who else was visiting? Young high school students who were going to become the Sunrise Movement. They're the ones who helped shape and write the text for the Green New Deal. And when Joe Biden was looking for things to say on the campaign trail, he, give him credit for it, made the choice to put parts of the Green New Deal into his campaign. And it later became the Inflation Reduction Act, right? So we need, I am all about structural change. I'm going to tell you about individual champions, all right? And here's the deal. We need structural change, we need individual champions, and we need individual champions for structural change. And that, I hope, is what we're going to be moving toward. Now, way back in 2020, on Labor Day, I woke up and took this picture. I spent a little time in the summer, and I guess it was early September, on a bay in the Puget Sound in the Salish Sea in Washington State. There's no filter on that picture. That's smoke. That's wildfire smoke. My father-in-law at the time was 95 years old, and he wasn't allowed to go outside for a week because of that smoke, right? And so I thought, well, I was in the middle of thinking about this book, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something with this. I'm going to investigate. So I called up some people, and there are two people I want to tell you about whose lives are intersecting, and they don't even know each other, all right? One of them is Sam Perkins. Sam Perkins, I knew since he was 4 years old because he lived across the street from me when I lived in Seattle way that way. And now Sam Perkins is a smoke jumper. He works for the Forest Service and he jumps out of planes and he parachutes down in front of wildfires. And with the team, he works to cut fire breaks before the fire gets to him. All right. So I learned a lot about him. You learn about his life in some of what I'm writing. But one of the things he showed me was about how a lot of our laws and practices aren't forward-looking and aren't flexible. All right. So he spends a lot of his time working on control fires, right, to take the fuel out so we don't have massive fires. We still have a policy in the Forest Service, mainly against this sort of a practice. And the default is not to burn anything. It's an inflexible policy, and Sam says it hurts us. The other thing about it is it's not forward-looking. You might not know this, but 50% of the entire budget of the U.S. Forest Service goes to extinguish fires. I didn't say manage forests and prevent fires. I said put out fires, all right? That is because Congress doesn't apportion enough money to the Forest Service, right? And so every year, they already know this, they are going to use more and more of their budget to put out more and more fires. They actually have programs to put into place climate change projections. They have really neat maps that you can pull up in the Forest Service and see climate change projections for fire zones. But the last time I checked, it stopped at something like 2020 because they don't have any more money to do it, right? And so these are issues where, you know, our lives perhaps are in danger in those ways. Now there's a fairness issue too. A lot of times when I talk to people, they think that the people whose houses are getting burned down are in the big fancy lodges and things like that. But the real story is because of housing density rules in cities, the suburbs have sprawled out into fire-prone areas like Santa Rosa, which is a veteran community in San Francisco, for instance. And if you take a look at the real estate market in San Francisco, you can see why everyone's moving out to Santa Rosa. And so I'm here to tell you that urban housing policy is related to wildfires, right? And it's the ability to see the connections to those things that I think is really important. Now, I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm third generation Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay, so I do know triple degree heat waves. And I had never seen a picture like that before in my life, but during Labor Day in 2020, that's what the skies looked like, whiskey, right? And at the same time, it happened that I was interviewing somebody named Cynthia Moore for my podcast. She lives in Las Vegas. She lives really close to where I grew up. And the area she lives now is mainly Latino community. She had a young boy named Liam who had allergies, who wasn't allowed to go outdoors during that smoke. He had to stay indoors. She was out trying to buy expensive air filtration equipment, and she was fielding all kinds of questions for people in her neighborhood, some of whom did not speak or read English very well, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. She was a realtor too, just like Richard Conlon, and she knew neighborhoods really well, and she eventually started working in environmental justice communities on pollution issues, not just smoke issues, but pollution issues. Now I want to show you, this is a special map. You can find these online. This is called a Social Vulnerability Index. It's put out by the good people at the CDC. And you can pull up any state you want and look at the counties and see the social vulnerability, that is the income level, linguistic isolation, race, all of the things that are associated with people being more vulnerable, right? And these are the sorts of things that Cynthia pays very good attention to. Liam's older now, and Cynthia now is a national coordinator for environmental justice in Nevada. And one of the things that she's working on now is trying to get passed a law in the state of Nevada that would, for the first time, guarantee rest, water, and shade for outdoor workers. Okay, now I said I grew up in triple degree heat. It's much worse now in Nevada. Nevada has no such law that I just described. Neither does New Mexico. Neither does Arizona. Neither, well, I'll just say it this way. In Texas, it's illegal for a municipality to guarantee water, shade, and rest to workers outside. That is a climate resilience issue, and of course a public health issue. And we're going to learn more about public health as we go forward too. I'm going to keep you in the Southwest for a moment. All right. One of the first places I went in looking for the research on my book was a place I love, Joshua Tree National Park. Now, when I was a kid, it wasn't a national park, but I went there a lot and I had lots of wonderful memories. And I love those really interesting yuccas, which actually aren't trees at all. And you've probably seen them, maybe in movies, maybe in magazines, maybe you've seen them on an album cover. Well, it's not the one you're thinking of. U2 never made it to the park, but Eagles did. And what I want to tell you about those Joshua trees is that they're really special. And I met with Jane Rogers, who now is the superintendent of that park. She was the chief scientist back when I talked with her. And one of the things that she suggested to me, and that they're really worried about, is that in the next 20, 30 years, we might not have Joshua trees in Joshua Tree National Park. And the reason is that they actually need colder weather during the springtime and the wintertime. And that's only up at high elevations. And so if you look at this chart up there, that last piece where the black is really, really small, that's an area where if we get 3 degrees Celsius, that's the place where Joshua trees will be able to live. Nowhere else in the park. All right? Now, most of this, despite our best efforts, right, because all of that is wilderness area, all of that, which is the highly protected area under the Wilderness Act of the United States. It's a very protective policy, but inflexible. Stick with me on that. The problem with Joshua trees is that they're burning down by thousands of acres. Why? Because there's an invasive grass that creates fuel, it's getting hotter, all kinds of things are happening, all right? And outside of the wilderness area in the national park, you will see people employed with weed whackers, getting rid of that invasive grass. And also they have a greenhouse, which I visited, and they plant new yuccas in areas. But guess what? It's really, really hard to do that in a wilderness area. And Rob Glicksman has helped me understand this. He's in the book, you'll find him. And we talk about this. What is it like when you have a really restrictive policy you think is doing good things, but it's inflexible, right? It might mean that you're going to face more of this. And I talked to some people that said, well, you know what, yuccas like this, they've lived everywhere over the last hundred of thousands of years. They've been in southern Utah where it's cooler. They've been in central Nevada where it's cooler. They're not there now, right? But they got there, so maybe they'll move, right? And it's true that trees and forests move. And one of the ways that the Joshua tree moves is that animals eat the seeds, and then they disperse, and then they scatter the seeds in their waste, and that's how forests move around. The only problem is that the animal that moved these seeds around isn't here anymore, all right? We used to have 12-foot Shasta sloths, but we don't anymore, okay? They're the only thing that could eat a Joshua tree, like completely. And they went extinct about the time that the human species arrived in North America. The problem then is that lots of lands in the national park system are more sensitive than other lands for a variety of reasons. And they are they're more prone to drought, and they're getting hotter. And that is the problem in the National Park Service if you talk to people. What are you most afraid of? Climate change. So we need more flexible laws, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine and someone who's spoken at this school before a few years back. This is Sharon Levine. She's an environmental justice advocate. She's won what's called the Goldman Prize, which is the Nobel Prize for environmental activism. She lives in an area you might know of as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, in the petrochemical corridor. She's a retired special ed teacher, right? And she had special superpowers. She was good at explaining things. She knew her community, and she knew how to study and learn things quickly and then explain them to other people. And that's how she has devoted most of her life. I never thought of her as a climate resilience expert, but some of her group called me right after Hurricane Ida and said, you and a whole bunch of people, you want to come help deliver ice and things to people, and I did it, because if I know Sharon's connected with something, I do it. And so I go. This just shows you some of the vulnerability there, and she's been nice enough to talk on my podcast and all kinds of things like that. So I went out with her, and she wanted to show me her house. She lost her entire roof, and we saw that. And she says, here, get in the car, we're driving somewhere. I'm like, where are we driving? We're going to go see American Styrene. I'm like, isn't that the plant that makes styrofoam? She's like, yes. She goes, because they have been belching out for a whole week scores of tons of toxic gases. Why, I asked. She says, because we lost power and they don't have a generator. And so the only way that they can avoid explosions at the plant is to release all that gas. And so I said, well, how much gas is it? She says, we don't know, because EPA's monitors run by the same electricity that the power's been out on for the last week. That's a lack of looking forward. Right? And so what we did is she handed me her phone. She says, I'm going to stand in front of this. I'm going to point to the flare. You're going to tape me on video, and we're going to put it on Facebook. I said, you're right there. So I took that picture and that video and wrote about it. I asked if I could write about it. She's like, sure. Now, if you just go down the road from where I just told you about, down to New Orleans and then go down farther south, you're going to see what the New York Times calls America's first climate refugees. I don't like the term. I love Carol Davenport, but I don't think she chose the term. The point, though, is that we in Louisiana are losing so much land. There are, I want to say in the last 20 years, the federal government came in and they erased scores of names of towns that no longer exist because they're underwater. And Ile de Jean Charles might be another place like that. The Ile de Jean Charles Choctaw live there. This is what that area looks like if you just want to see where it is on the map. And again, you can see the social resilience. If you want to get to Ile de Jean Charles, you take a road, and that's what the road looks like. It's actually a really good place to fish, and people do it. They drive their car up, they roll the window down, and they cast right out the window. Not kidding. You catch. It's good. But otherwise, it's a really tough existence. And so the Center for Progressive Reform that I mentioned to you, we actually did some work on this. We found that there were, at the time, 12 different communities in the United States that wanted to relocate entirely because of climate change, and all of them were indigenous groups. So Ile-de-Jean-Charles was one of those groups, and in the book I interview Chief Cherelle Parfait-Dardar, who's become a friend. We've worked on a number of task forces together, and also Chief Albert Natkin, who's with the Ile-de-Jean-Charles Choctaw. They both wanted to be champions of climate resilience, and so they built a plan where they would move the community that I just described to you. They would acquire property, they would build a special kind of community, invite all of the other Choctaw who had left to come back, and that they would have their community back. All they needed was money, and as it turned out in the Obama administration, there was something called resilience grants that were made available, and they got one, $40 million plus, to relocate, acquire land, and build a new community to invite everyone back. They worked with land use planners, and they had a plan that was going to have solar energy, it was going to have a school, because the school was about to close, it was going to have a community space, it was going to be the place where the Choctaw could come back, right? It didn't work out that way. And I'm telling you this because I still talk to reporters who think it did. What happened has to do with the way that the law was organized. The Ile-de-Jean-Charles Choctaw, also called the Biloxi-Chitimacha Choctaw, they're not a federally recognized tribe. And there are problems with that. Number one, if they want to invite their ethnic group to return and come back and manage that as such, that's against the anti-discrimination laws of the Fair Housing Act. All right? So that was one issue. But then they said, we'll invite anybody. We just want to invite ours, and we'll bring others too. The second problem was because they're not federally recognized, they couldn't apply for the grant by themselves. They had to have the state of Louisiana apply for the grant for them. The state of Louisiana took all of their plans, won the grant, and took the money. And then what the state of Louisiana did is it said, we have a different plan. We think it's a better plan. We're not going to talk with the tribe. We're only going to talk to individual people. So they built individual single-family homes, no other amenities, on a piece of land that they selected and purchased without even telling the tribe that they had purchased the land. And it caused huge tension. Some tribal members moved because that was better than what they had, they thought, and others didn't. A statement was issued by the Choctaw essentially saying, they basically said, we don't want the money, we don't want any part of it, we're going to raise money from nonprofits in the private sector, and we're back to square one after all of this. It was a pilot project, $40 million spent on it, and what we learned was that it's important to talk to the people that you're moving. Right? I'm not going to leave you on a down note. I've got a couple minutes, and I'm gonna use them. All right. So I know it's as hot as a jacuzzi in that water that I showed you, but I'm going to tell you one of the most inspirational champions that I met. I interviewed a lot of young people in this book, and at the time there were some high school students working on solar energy and various things. Some of them now are graduated from college, going on to big things. One of my favorite people in this book is Cara Norman, who was in middle school when I interviewed her. Cara Norman lives in Key West, and she was bored in middle school. Okay, I get it, everyone was, right? What she wanted to do was learn how to scuba dive. So she joined an after-school private activity group of scuba divers, and I met the woman who leads that group, and I've since become friends with her. Her name is Cannon, Kama Cannon. Cara Norman and Cannon. And Kama was a marine scientist, and she wanted to teach middle school kids how to scuba dive. And a lot of them come into it through Disney, like everybody does, right? You know, they want to see Nemo and all of that kind of thing. But then she would quickly teach them about science and about how coral works, and that coral was dying. All right? And so these kids, mainly girls, almost all girls, in middle school, taking her diving class, all want to be marine scientists, right? Cara Norman, in high school now, is actually a PI, a principal investigator of peer-reviewed research going on in the University of Miami on coral gardening. And coral gardening is raising coral in offshore nurseries, and you're raising a particular kind of coral, particular individuals that are especially resilient to temperature swings, and you replant them. And then you study them over time. The largest coral gardening program in the world is in the Keys. It's called the Coral Restoration Foundation. And there are hundreds of organizations like this all over the world. I dived with them and watched how they do it, took a course on how to do it and so on. There are people who think, whether it's a good thing, whether you can bring it to scale, whether you cannot bring it to scale, these kinds of things. I talked to Cara about it, and at one point she said, I gotta go, I can't talk to them, I gotta go to a meeting. I'm like, what meeting you gotta go to? She goes, just got a lot of school stuff. And I said, well, are you a political person, Cara? And she says, no, I'm not political at all. I'm not Democrat, I'm not Republican, I don't care about that. And I said, well, where are you going on this meeting? She says, I gotta go to a hearing. Well, what's the hearing about? She says, well, I'm against the new cruise ships coming into Key West, and so I'm advocating against that. And I said, that sounds kind of political to me. And she says, no, it's not, it's science. I'm just telling them science. And I'm like, okay, right? And these are the kids that I want to put my money on, right? That are learning stuff and going to teach us something. Now, here's something that I am working on right now. I'm working on another book on oceans and ocean resilience. And it comes out of this particular chapter because I just got so involved in it that I was like, oh my gosh, I got to keep researching this. And one of the things I'm considering now is something called nature's rights. And you might have heard about this. It can explain a lot of different kinds of legal strategies. For me, what nature's rights means is that it's a system in which we look at an ecosystem as a whole and pay attention to preserving or restoring its entire functioning. And the second piece of it is that we have human beings who are appointed either through councils or as plaintiffs or as something who are in charge of seeking the welfare of the system that I just described. How does that relate to coral? It relates to coral in this way. The second largest reef in the world is the Mesoamerican reef, which if you've ever been to Mexico or Belize, you have snorkeled by or maybe dived by or maybe driven a boat with a glass bottom and seen, all right? That reef is on the ropes. And it can be helped. When storms come, it breaks apart. And coral restorers can put it back together if they have the money and the organizational power. So what happened is the Nature Conservancy and Swiss Re put together an insurance policy. And when there's a storm of a certain size, money cashes out. It goes to states in Mexico, including Quintana Roo. And that state then takes the money and puts it towards rebuilding the reef. It's treating the reef the way we treat a human being, with a health insurance policy. And it's the first insurance policy for a living organism in the world, and for an ecosystem, I should say. And it's so successful that Hawaii now is doing the same thing. They got mimicry to underwrite that policy. So that, to me, you can say, okay, so now we're really looking at fairness in terms of even beyond the human world, but it's all connected. And there's a flexibility story here too that I want to make sure that you see. You might not know it, but coral's an animal. You might not know it, but coral is the first animal that was designated a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act on account of climate change, both staghorn and elkhorn coral. That's important because it makes it really hard to experiment with coral restoration in the United States because they're threatened species. All right? No one planned it that way, that's just how it is. And so I talked to a lot of coral restorers and scientists who were going outside the United States to do their work. In fact, I was in French Polynesia more recently where they're doing a lot of this work, actually helping folks in French Polynesia design laws that would be compatible with coral restoration. They want to be the hub for the world, and they want to have a legal framework for it. So these are the kinds of things that we need to continue to look at, because 40% of the southern states down in Mexico are Mayan, right? And so again, there's a fairness story, an indigenous story, and people are watching us, right? That new generation is watching us. And so I just want to, one of the reasons I wrote this book was I wanted to talk to people and I didn't want to scare people. People say, why are you writing about an octopus as like the central figure in the climate resilience story? And it's because it's fun, right? Because it's not scary. There's plenty of scary stuff in my book, but I don't want you to see it on the first page. I want you to get there through a portal that you already understand. I've given talks like this down to middle schools, and those kids aren't scared. You say, how did an octopus get in a parking garage? They want to know. They want to know the physics. I say, well, can we stop it? Well, let's get a screen. Let's get, let's get a one-way valve. Let's do this. Let's do that. They've got so many ideas. They are not scared. What they are is sort of championing at the bit to do something. And so we get scared, and what we have to learn is that the opposite of despair is action. And that's really what this book, I hope, conveys. And so thanks very much. Do we have time for a question or so?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm from Quito, Ecuador, and my understanding is that Ecuador was the first country on earth to give Mother Nature basically rights.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I've actually started to do more work on this, and among lawyers and legal advocates, there's plenty to discuss because questions about does it work, does it really mean anything, when does it work? I'm writing now about the Salish Sea, which is the Puget Sound is part of the Salish Sea in Washington, and there's a movement there not only to recognize orcas as legal entities, but also the entire Salish Sea. Sometimes these programs can be successful, and they seem to be most successful in areas that have a community in which that type of a framework resonates, particularly among indigenous groups. So another place where this has really taken off is in New Zealand, a Polynesian region, and the Salish with the Lummi Indians and other tribal peoples around the Salish in Canada and the United States. So I think there is real potential there. I think it does depend on cultural pieces to it and the way the law works.
I'm a 2L at GW, and I've had several conversations with my in-laws who want to move to Florida for retirement, and they don't believe in climate change, or rather, some of those conversations have resulted in them saying, well, I'm not going to be alive to see the effects of climate change anyway. Yeah. And so do you think that the concept of climate resilience would be more palatable to them in terms of getting to think about Florida is not going to look like what you think it looks like today, and even today you're going to have these sorts of problems.
I think that's a really good point. So first of all, they are seeing climate change in Florida, as you know. And even if they don't recognize climate change, they are seeing their insurance policies go up. Right? We're seeing that in Louisiana too. And it's actually affected the real estate market in Florida. What's odd about the real estate market in Florida, one of the things that's odd about the real estate market in Florida, is because there are some people that effectively just self-insure. I mean, they don't care how much that house is. They want it to be on, on the beach and whatever. I do think there's a good amount of research. I spent a lot of time on communications research writing this book. And there's a fair amount of research that convinces me that, that talking about climate resilience and adaptation is a gateway into talking about other climate-related issues. The reason for that is that this is essentially a values issue we have. And some people aren't, world government doesn't appeal to them, national pollution laws don't appeal to them, and so they're going to be very resistant to hearing about climate change. But what might appeal to them is the safety of their family, the value of their property, the community cohesion that they might experience. And if you enter a discussion talking about those things, like don't you want to be able to take your kids fishing to the same place you like to go fishing? Don't you want to protect your assets so that it's still insurable and you could still sell your home someday? Those things resonate, and they're small. So this is about land use planning, it's about local hearings, it's about word of mouth, and those kinds of activities are important. And if people want to start there, let them start there. That's how I see that. And I think that asking people to do things that they normally wouldn't want to do is hard, but asking them to pay attention to things they already pay attention to is a little bit easier. That's why I bring up the fishing. I'm always talking about hunting in Louisiana. I'm always talking about insurance rates, because sometimes those move people. Yeah, Rob.
So you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a relatively new law that pours hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, into efforts to achieve climate resilience. But you also talked about the possibility of amending existing laws that are inflexible. You mentioned two, the Wilderness Act and the Endangered Species Act, that are designed to be nature protective, but in particular circumstances they've worked out to be so inflexible that they're doing harm rather than good. So we could amend those laws to incorporate flexibility, but in the past it's been thought that if you try and amend those laws, you open up a Pandora's box and provide opportunities for opponents of the laws to weaken them across the board and kind of dress them up as amendment efforts. So how do you strike that balance between trying to make sure that existing environmental protection laws remain strong, but yet are flexible enough to meet current needs that we didn't anticipate when the laws were adopted?
That's really hard. I mean, you and I would both, I imagine, like to amend the the Endangered Species Act, and other acts, the Wilderness Act maybe, if we were the only ones allowed at the table. I think we are at a time politically where it's very dangerous to open up either of those conversations. And I say as much in the book, we shouldn't change those laws. I do think I have become convinced, talking to experts like you, and I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but I think I've talked to others that have told me this, that there is enough flexibility, even the way the laws are written, for adventurous agency officials to build flexibility in where they're not likely to want to build flexibility. And I actually think that culture part of the agency is really important. When I talk to people at Joshua Tree National Park, I talk to a number of the scientists, and I said, well, why don't you just try to plant them in the wilderness area, replant? I said, and I showed them, I said, you could do it. Look at this provision, look at this. You could take a weed whacker in there, right? And no one wanted to do it. Part of it was that scientific mind, oh, we'll screw it up, we need a test case that's perfectly pristine. And then the other part was, oh, we hear from it from upstairs, in the agencies. And so even when there are ways to be flexible, their culture tells them not to be. And one of the things that I found when I was talking to people at the Park Service is they kept talking about the surveys of people who go to the park. They take these surveys, I think they're every year, where they ask visitors what they care about, what they don't care about, what the experiences are. And they said, our bosses look at those. Our bosses look at those. And so if you tell me that we need better bathrooms, I'm on it. I'm going to find the money in the budget. I'm going to figure it out. And I said, well, how many people ask you about climate change? Nobody. Right? I was up at a melting glacier in Alaska, the Mendenhall Glacier, right, which is sort of famous for being the glacier that we're losing in Alaska. And I asked one of the Park Service officials there, I said, does anyone ask you why this is smaller than it has been? Does anyone ask you about climate change? She's like, nobody asked me that. They asked me where to go find the grizzly bears, catching the salmon. That's what they asked me about. And so there's an issue there, and it's also maybe a little kind of a wandering way of answering the question, but I think that the agencies have the flexibility to do it if there's enough direction. And I understand that it is a problem that we can't fix right now politically.
Thank you so much, this is great. So my name's Juliana, I organize with Fridays for Future USA and the New York City local group.
Oh, wonder, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
So it's youth-led action, grassroots civil society, and I really like what you said about, the protests leading to the sunrise movement leading to the community of youth. All right, that's great. Because we're huge advocates of civil society, we hold each other accountable. But when my job is kind of like onboarding new local groups, so if a person wants to open up the New York local group, the Seattle local groups, I walk them through the steps of how to do that with youth-led movement. But there's a lot of conservative areas or areas where it's really, really hard for young people to connect with each other and have climate action. Also, Fridays for Future has international spaces, like most affected people in areas where you have people from countries that can't necessarily organize, so it's very dangerous for them to organize. So I really like what you said about climate resilience being a gateway, but how would you say young people can organize around cutting emissions in these type of areas when it's kind of either unsafe or like really, really uncomfortable to start these conversations?
So I don't have so much to say, I think, about the safety part of it, because I just don't know enough about what those steps might be. I will say I do understand this uncomfortable part, plenty, because there are a lot of young people, and old people too, who talk about sort of feeling paralyzed by despair, anxiety, and these kinds of things. Here's a striking figure for you. In the United States, according to the Yale Communications, and Yale does communication studies on this, 60% of Americans are concerned or alarmed about climate change. 60%, okay? I shared that with my publisher when I was shopping the book, right? Now, get this. Very few people in that group talk about climate change. Even to other people that share their concerns. They don't talk about it. And there are all kinds of reasons why that is, including maybe fear. But I think we need to find language to do it. And one of the things that I suggest in the book, and I'm experimenting with this idea when I talk to people, one of the reasons I think people don't want to talk about it is because they think it's just so awful and there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So why would you even bother just, bumming everybody out to talk about that? And what Cara taught me, and some of the other people that I talk to in this book, is that what you can do is you can find something that you already care about and ask yourself, how will climate change that? And then you can work at it from there. So maybe you're interested in gardening and you already have a group of people that you garden with. Or maybe you wine taste with people. Or maybe you're really concerned about children's exercise and you're interested in kids being able to be outside and being on the playground. Or maybe you're interested in hunting and fishing. All you need to do then is just say, how is climate going to change that? And then how can we prepare for that? What can I learn? I don't have to learn about climate. I'm going to learn about the fish that I like to catch. And that way I'm going to learn about climate. Or the wine that I like. And that way I'm going to learn about climate. And I don't have to make new friends. I don't have to join a climate justice organization if I don't want to, where I'm not going to know anybody. I can go to the same people that I garden with, or the same people that I teach grade school with, or the same people that I knit with, right? And I can say, oh, where does this yarn come from? Where does this wine come from? Where does this what come from? And all of a sudden, we're in a safe space, if I can use that word, something that I'm already comfortable talking about, and I'm just adding a new element. And then when I'm ready, I can do more, right? But I think just doing that small thing is enough in the beginning. It's enough to get started. And to say it's not enough means you're just not going to do anything. And so I'm all for it's enough to get started. And then you do more and more and more. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for your very insightful presentation. I'm a lawyer, so I'm thinking about, from sort of the legal advocacy perspective. You talked about, nature's rights being something that's slowly moving. You talked about maybe some inflexibility in environmental law. So the biggest question I'm exploring in my own work, I do human rights impact litigation, is how can human rights frameworks maybe sort of fill the gap as those bodies of law are still developing? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, I think, this is not my area of expertise. I see it a lot in Louisiana because the environmental justice community uses protests and appeals to the UN human rights bodies. In fact, the Ile de Jean Charles Choctaw submitted a grievance with the UN human rights body exactly about this, and they've done the same after Hurricane Katrina. I think that, I don't know that that results in a legal outcome that helps, but what it does do is it unites the community. It allows them to clarify their points of view, to focus their grievance, and then to build a framework, a philosophical framework in which they can talk to other people about it, including reporters. And I do think, and the reason they've been covered so much by National Geographic and New York Times and everybody else is in part because of that human rights angle that they have been able to use. So just because it doesn't result in a legal outcome doesn't mean that the law has not been useful, I think, in that way. But it's an area I wish I knew more about. I'd love to know more about what you were. Was there, yes, sir, yeah.
Thinking about the hypothetical of the state or the federal government insuring a reef,
Yeah.
would it be, I mean, if there was a dispute under the contract, would there be federal admiralty law? Is it a marine insurance contract? Are you under federal law, or are we in state law, Karen Ferguson? And would your answer be different if, as we saw recently, there was no more Wilburn Road and Wilburn Road got repaired?
Yeah, so I mean, these are all really interesting questions. They call it an insurance policy. I call it an insurance policy. It's really a kind of a financial instrument. It's what's called a parametric insurance policy, which is essentially a bet that a hedge fund might make, where you're essentially betting that that a storm of such and so measured magnitude will not happen. And you say it will happen, the insurance company says it won't happen. The insured, which is in this case Quintana, says, we'll pay a premium, and if it hits these numbers in this wind speed, you pay us money, and we get to use the money however we want. We're not talking about causation, we're not talking about damages, we're not talking about any of that. Mexico City insures itself from earthquakes using the same kind of a parametric policy. It's not, so it's not vulnerable to the sorts of laws that you're talking about. Is one thing. But the second thing is there is a fair debate in the developing world and in the rights community about whether this is actually a good thing to do, because in a way it's taking somebody's money because there's a risk that they can't bear, and they're very sophisticated assets, and you can imagine that that if you don't have equal information and if you don't have equal bargaining power, it might be a way for banks to make money without necessarily without paying what they should be paying for it. Weather insurance is very much the same. Crop insurance, and this is actually used in India. There are financial instruments that are made available to farmers in India based on parametric insurance policies based on weather. And one of the criticisms in India is that a lot of the farmers are not sophisticated or knowledgeable enough to actually know whether they're getting a good deal or not. Yes?
My question in common is sort of more theoretical. So you're talking about rights of nature, which are more eco-centric, sort of a theoretical approach, versus human rights, which are more anthropocentric. And so, like in the context of climate change, when we're talking about rights of nature, just from a narrative perspective, I'm thinking there are going to be times where we need to take away the rights of nature, like the wildfire that you mentioned.
Yes, right.
In the sense that we have to cut down a belt of the forest, and that has been the case all around. And so it's not ecocentric, it's more anthropocentric, like it's more a human rights-based approach because we're doing something to protect the humans. But then we have the health insurance of the coral reef, which is more ecocentric, where we are actually putting, like giving something to the nature and protecting them instead of taking them away. And so the question then is, if it, like it would, even if we're talking about making it more ecocentric, meaning making it more nature or eco-centric based, it'll still be human, right?
I agree with that.
I mean, the ways would be inclined towards like more human rights approach. And so,
yes.
And just from a narrative perspective, indigenous cultures have definitely been more eco-centric in the sense that in a lot of indigenous cultures, they will also give away their lives in order to protect certain ecosystems and natural resources. But do you see something like that happening in this human?
No, and I myself am not advocating for that. Now, I've studied this sort of on and off because it's very interesting to me. I'm less interested in pushing a philosophical argument and more interested in pushing a practical argument. And my practical argument is whatever you think about the right of a landscape or the right of an ecosystem to exist, I think that there's a practical reason for wanting it to function in a way, and that might mean that might mean suppressing fire in some way. But I would be talking about an ecological function, and what I'm talking about is a framework in which we care about the ecological function as opposed to caring about the particular good or service that is on the market. In this way, economists and philosophers might agree, because this is kind of sounding like ecosystem services, resource economics, right? So my main attitude is, my goal is that I just want something that looks at the whole ecosystem. And I care a lot about people than the people that I'm talking about. What's interesting is it's a double-edged sword, as you may know. I mean, the Yamuna and the Ganga, the Ganges River, are both sort of understood as legal entities in India. And the Supreme Court, as I understood it, has said, yeah, they owe duties too. And that means they need to provide for the community just like other entities do. And so you can take it in these different ways. And, you know, I'm studying the Salish Sea, I told you. The Lummi Indians were in favor of seeing it as a legal entity, but they wanted to know about their fishing rights. They weren't going to get on board if they were going to lose their fishing rights, right? And so part of the sale is, well, keeping the Salish Sea intact and functioning is a way to ensure that you get your fishing rights, right? And so I do think it's complicated that way, and I'm not so interested in getting into the philosophical debate, because I'm more interested in solving the practical problem. And if this helps us solve the practical problem, I'm all for it.
So if
Yeah.
I can add just if we are trying to draw human rights, nature rights-based laws, they're going to be full of exceptions in
Yes.
favor of individuals. Okay.
I think that's right. And maybe that takes us into the same, into the same muddy waters as before in some ways.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. I am Soledad Garcia Muñoz, and I came from Georgetown University now. I am the Dragon Chair in Human Rights.
Oh, welcome.
And thank you, and congratulations for this wonderful event. And previously, I was the special rapporteur of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental
So
Rights.
you can talk.
So
You will be talking.
I will be delighted to talk about the human rights approach, but I have to share some information I think is important too. But I have two special questions for you. Two of my last visits as a special rapporteur were specifically to Louisiana and Alaska.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I really resonated with your pictures and
Yeah.
your exposition. And my question are in relation, first, what about business? What is your experience or your idea that you can share in relation to the role that business play in this situation? And the second is about the rights of future generations as a tool to defend the human rights of the present generation and of the nature rights too. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you asked those simple questions. My very brief response to the second one, which is a really wonderful question about the rights of future generations. I think that's being tested in some lawsuits by a nonprofit law firm called Our Children's Trust, who is working very hard to sort of build an argument based on the public trust doctrine and the Liberties Clause of the 14th Amendment that there is a right to a functioning environment, right, or a right to a functioning climate. And I would myself put that in the category of somewhat of this nature's rights, the right to a functioning ecosystem. The question about business, I think I am not afraid of that question at all. There's a chapter in my book about what I call the largest climate resilience project in the world, and it's in Louisiana. It is restoring the largest intact, or not intact, but contiguous wetlands in North America. It's all in Louisiana. You think Everglades is great. You could take the Everglades, drop it in southern Louisiana, you would never see it again. We have a giant system, right? And we're trying to restore it with a program that might cost about $100 billion. And that program over 50 years is diverting water coming from the levees, fresh water and sediment, to rebuild levees to allow natural systems to work on their own. We've got engineers from the Netherlands, we've got engineers all over the EU, we've got scientists from NASA, we've got scientists from the EU, we've got scientists from MIT and Berkeley and Stanford, and they're all down in Louisiana, Caltech, and there's huge investment of money down there, learning how you rebuild a natural landscape. I tell my students, I'm like, there is no better place, I think, to be if you're engaged in that kind of activity of putting a landscape back together at that kind of scale is hugely exciting. No one in the world has done it. And we've got engineers watching us all over the world on this. Now, what's hard is convincing conventional businesses in Louisiana that that's good for them, because the oil and gas industry is not convinced it's good for them. It isn't good for them because the oil and gas industry, by their own studies, are responsible to 30 to 60% of all of the destruction of the wetlands in Luisiana. And so, yes, they're going to be on a leash and other people are going to be set free. I really want to build out offshore wind. And the Biden administration is already opening up and is already auctioned off leases right out of our back door in Louisiana for offshore wind. And the oil and gas industry is not happy about that either. But there's lots of good business in Louisiana if we open it up and take advantage of that. I think it's not so much are we pro-business or not pro-business, it's like the businesses themselves are competing against each other right now, and that's very hard politically, to say the least for us.
I'm going to exercise the moderator's prerogative and step in to make sure that you have the opportunity to purchase a copy of this wonderful book and make a quick sales pitch in that regard. So this book has been on my reading list a long time. I haven't gotten to it. And book talks like this are supposed to move it up the list. And
There's an audio version. There's an audio version.
that may be
You're
what
on
I
the
resort
elliptical.
to. But I'm going to get this book in my head, and let me tell you why. So I've been teaching and writing in this space for 15, 20 years, and I learned so much from the way Professor Verchick characterized these issues, set the table for our discussion tomorrow, integrating youth climate activism, climate migration, environmental justice and public health issues, all into one very accessible and readable package. Who wouldn't want to sit down and read that? So I encourage you to take this opportunity to take a copy of that book home with you, and also continue this dialogue that has really set us up so nicely for our conversation. Tomorrow I had all kinds of questions, but all of you had valuable questions, and I can always talk over dinner with my questions. So I'm so glad that you engaged the way you did, and this is a great topic, and a great conversation to continue. And I certainly wanted to at least pose this question, perhaps without an answer, in terms of the youth attendees in the audience. I've always struggled, and I know you've talked about this in the course of your book tour, this idea of the difference between optimism and hope when we talk about climate resilience and our shared future. And I've always thought of myself as an optimist, and then climate change kind of sunk in, and I do it every day. And I feel like I became less of an optimist about what the future looks like, but I never lost that sense of hope, and I want to instill that in the future generation, in their perspective on climate change. There's so much from what you've heard today and for what you can do on a daily basis that should give you a sense of hope and purpose and action as the alternative to despair. That's really what I hope this event does more than anything else, for not just the younger members of the audience, but for those of us who still have a few years left as well. I mean, it's something that humans need, especially in the face of intense obstacles and challenges that we surely do face with climate change. So please join me in thanking Professor Verchick.